With the overhead squat assessments, we have a lot of information to work with. However, a lot of times you might have that client that has a great overhead squat, which doesn't give you a whole lot to work with when it comes to working with what muscles to address that are overactive and what muscles to address that are underactive. So we have an arsenal of exercises that we can do as assessments to give you more information so you can create a more precise or relative program for your client. The first assessment that we might use, in addition to the overhead squat, is the single leg squat assessment. So taking the arms out from the overhead position, taking away a foot, we're going to have the client perform that same squat motion. So using those kinetic chain checkpoints, ears, shoulders, hips, knees, and foot and ankle, we're going to watch all of those kinetic chain points and now just do that on that single leg. You don't need a whole lot of squatting motion here, maybe 5 on the one and 5 on the other, and just see what those kinetic chain checkpoints do. So looking at the shoulders, the hips, we want to make sure that those two checkpoints are nice and level. Here we also want to look at the relationship between the hips, knees, and the foot and ankle, watching where the knee goes during that squat motion. From there, you can look at the notes that you've taken on their performance on that single leg squat on the right leg as well as the left leg, and note any differences between the two and start to program from there. So this assessment is going to be great to see, you know, what the client might need to do to address their balance if they're going to be doing exercises on a single leg. And like I said, overhead squat didn't give you a whole lot of information. This will actually flesh out more information on where muscle imbalances might lie. The next assessment we might use are pushing and pulling. So we have the cable in this example. You could easily use a resistance band to where you, as the trainer, might be holding it, or it could be anchored to a solid piece of equipment where we can pull or push. With the overhead squat assessment, Wendy brought up arms falling forward, excessive forward lean, low back arch, knees coming in, feet turning out. We can look at some of those same compensations as they come up during these two movements. Here we have the client standing in front of the machine in a nice staggered stance. You want to see how the client performs in one stance with right foot staggered forward, maybe 5 pulls from that position, 5 with the opposite foot forward as well. Here you want to watch out for possible compensations at the low back, shoulders shrugging, and the head coming forward. We can see those same compensations from the front as well as from the back when it comes to pushing motions. So taking the single leg squat, taking the pushing motions, taking the pulling motions, we now have more information to help guide us through in creating that perfect program to get your client started. Once we've taken those assessment results with those 3 basic assessments on top of the overhead squat, now we can look at what muscles are forcing the issue, and those muscles we would consider as the overactive muscles. And then we have a list of muscles that are letting it happen, and those are the underactive muscles. So with the overactive, these are the muscles we need to relax, we need to lengthen, and with the underactive muscles, these are the ones we need to upregulate and get them to do more of their part in offering stabilization to the joint. Here on the left side we have from the front and from the side, and looking at those different kinetic chain checkpoints. And as we saw with the overhead squat assessment, we have different compensations that we can address through foam rolling and stretching, as well as activation through basically some core work. Now, just like what we did with the overhead squat, you have trends of muscles that you might see creating and allowing compensations to happen. So with the example of the foot and ankle, with the feet turning out, just like what we saw with the overhead squat assessment, we have the calf complex with the soleus and the gastrocnemius, as well as the hamstring complex that are doing too much. Right? They are limiting the range of motion through the foot and ankle complex. Underactive muscles, and we've seen this before, anterior tibialis, posterior tibs, and the glute complex. So you can take this set of compensations, add it to your observations from the overhead squat assessment, and now you can basically validate some of the compensations you've seen through the previous compensations observed through another assessment. Coming down to the knees, knee valgus, which is your typical knee compensation. Again, the hip flexor, the TFL, tensor fasciae lata, adductor complex, and again, glute complex, and we're seeing a trend here with the anterior and the posterior tibs. The lumbopelvic hip complex, the LPHC, excessive forward trunk lean, low back arch, looking at the pushing, looking at the pulling. Even though we're not just fighting gravity, we are pushing and pulling. We can still observe some of these compensations when it comes to committing those movements. So again, the trend continues, calf, hip flexors. Here we have the rectus abdominis again that's come up in the other assessments as well. And the trend continues again with the hamstrings, glute complex, hamstring complex, and abdominal. So as we start to look at all of these compensations, now we can have grounds to prioritize those muscles that come up more frequently when it comes to the stabilization program design. Shoulders, arms falling forward, scapular elevation, that is that shrugging that you might notice in the push and the pull. Lats came up before. A lot of times if you see a compensation once, you're most likely going to see it again, especially as we challenge movement in different planes of motion. And then we have the head and neck. Head jutting forward is the primary compensation that we would notice there. Looking at the neck, muscles with the sternocleidomastoid, the levator scapula, as well as the deep cervical flexors being underactive. They're not doing their job as far as holding the neck into position. So a lot of information to process here, but your job as a personal trainer means that you are going to perform the assessments, make your observations, and then piece the strategies together as it comes to overactive and underactive muscle. A lot of information to compress, but that's where your job as a personal trainer comes into play. Your study of human anatomy as well as human movement science comes into program design for your clients.
So in my opinion, assessments are the most important thing because it provides you with the blueprint of exactly what you need to do when you're trying to get a client to safely, effectively, and efficiently go through their workout in a program. And so if we don't have a starting point, we really don't have a way of knowing what exercises are going to be appropriate for that client. And so what we start you off with is after we've gathered all the subjective information, which is just us verbally talking, we start going into our movement assessments. And so the first one we're going to talk about is the overhead squat. The overhead squat, the purpose of this particular assessment is really to help identify those movement compensations that Ken just discussed. So if you have a muscle imbalance, there's going to be muscles that are causing those compensations and other muscles that are allowing those compensations. And so with us doing the overhead squat, it's going to help us determine which is which. So therefore we can put them back into proper alignment so they get moving correctly. So how do we do this? We're going to put every single client in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. And the reason we do this is because it gives us a starting point. It allows us to put them in a starting position, and then when they start to move, it allows us to see where they deviate. And so the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints are pretty simple. I'm going to have Ken come up, and I'm going to show you, if Ken is my client, how do I set this client up so therefore I can start the assessment afterwards. So when we talk about the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, what you're going to do is, I would personally show, tell, do. So I would show my client and have them mirror. But for the sake of the workshop, I'm going to go ahead and just speak it as Ken demos it. So you're going to look and make sure that the feet are pointed straight ahead and they're about shoulder to hip width apart. And so from that point, you're going to actually look at the second and third toe and make sure they're in line with the knees. Then we go ahead and move up to the hip. And when we say go into neutral position, that's what we're looking for. We're trying to see where are they on the horizon. So do you see anything shifting forward or back? And so what you can easily do is start telling your clients or showing your clients how you would cue them. And so what I often do is have my clients put their hands on their hips. I will tell them to go into there's a happy cat and a scared dog, right? So if you pet a cat's back, what happens is their tail goes up. So I tell them to give me a happy cat. That allows me to see when they go into an excessive arch, what the difference is between their neutral and their excessive, excuse me. From there, I tell them to give me a scared dog. When you take a dog to a vet, what does it do? It tucks its tail, so I tell them to scared dog it for me. Then I tell them to give me a happy cat again, scared dog, and then try to find that neutral position. So from this position, all I'm gonna have Ken do is bring his shoulders back a little bit, tuck his chin a little, and then he lifts his hands over his head. Now, when you do this, I'm gonna have him bring them straight up. If you see a bend in the elbow, tell them to go ahead and straighten that out, because even though it may feel uncomfortable, it's gonna allow me to see what happens once we start movement. Okay? Thank you very much. So from there, this is the starting position. I just put Ken in, but as you can see, he's gonna start in the standing position, hands overhead. This is what, again, from the side, he would look like. And then I actually have him begin a squat. And so oftentimes clients don't know how to squat. So you want to make sure that you show them, this is what I want you to do. You're gonna stand with your feet here, again, put them in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. And from there, you're just gonna tell them to sit like they're gonna sit into a chair. So they don't have to go to the floor, but if they also give you a little, you need them to go a little lower, so therefore you can see what's happening. You also want to make sure that it's pain-free though. So if a client can't go down to the depth that you're looking for, have them go down to the depth that's comfortable and pain-free, but also that's going to allow you to see if there's any deviations from their starting position. And then you're also going to look at them from the anterior view, and you're going to look at them from the side view. So what is ideal movement? If you find this client, you should let me know, because almost every client that will come into your facility or that comes in to see you, they'll probably have some sort of compensation. If they have a ton of them, we're going to show you how to program that. However, if you see any deviation from ideal alignment, you're going to mark it, because you're going to have your client perform approximately 5 squats from the anterior view and 5 squats from the lateral view. And so if you want to have the client keep going and you walk around them, that's fine. However, you want to make sure that you're consistent in however you're performing the assessments each and every time. And so ideally what we're looking for, if we start from the bottom and work our way up, is do their feet stay pointed forward. If they do, fantastic, you move on. Do their knees stay over their second and third toe? Do their hips stay level and in neutral? And are their arms directly overhead with the elbows extended? And does their head stay in neutral position? Again, if you see any compensations, you're going to take your check sheet and you're just going to make a note of that.